And so they gave us permission to do those bombers. I can't wait for you. We're learning a lot about it. Yes, how this happens. Yes. Here we are. I'll sit behind you and make sure you behave. Yes.
We'll try to get started. Yeah, come on down. In private time, we've got plenty of chairs.
We were optimistic.
He was working on the prototype. He's got a whole screen.
All right, everybody settled. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Howard Lawson. I'm the Executive Director of the Union County Museum, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's presentation. Today's program is jointly presented by the Union County Library System and the Union County Historical Society. Ms. Taylor Atkinson, the Executive Director here at the library, and I have been working for some time to bring this event together. Unfortunately, Ms. Atkinson is under the weather and could not be with us today. We are honored to have with us Dr. Cheryl McCauley to deliver her presentation on Professor Thomas Lowe, pioneer aeronaut. Cheryl McCauley grew up in Baltimore County, Maryland, and moved to Huntsville, Alabama 20 years ago. Her undergraduate degree from Westchester University, Pennsylvania, is a Bachelor of Music in Piano Performance. She is a retired Army Reservist and DoD civilian. Her master's degrees are from George Mason University in Public Administration and the U.S. Army War College in Strategic Studies. After she deployed to Djibouti, Horn of Africa in 2004, she volunteered for a one-year tour in Baghdad, Iraq from 2009 to 2010. She used her VA educational benefits to earn a Doctor of Management and Organizational Leadership from the University of Phoenix. She served as Vice President of the Tennessee Valley Civil War Roundtable from 2010 to 2012 and President in 2005. Her first published book, Asante Sana, Life Lessons from Kili, on Kindle, Audible, and paperback, chronicles the Macaulay's 2010 journey to climb Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania, Africa. Her memoirs can be found in two After the Butterfly books, which came out in 2022 and 2025. She has been married to John McCauley, retired CW5 U.S. Army, for 40 fantastic years. They've enjoyed traveling the world together, golfing and together, yeah. Their rescue beagle, Lindsay, which is Swahili for companion, is a joyful addition to their home. Cheryl has a wide array of interests and enjoys serving others when opportunities become available. She encouraged others to write the book they have in them. And without any further delay, I'm going to turn the podium over to Dr. McCauley.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me. Can everybody see okay? And feel free to move forward if you like. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And I'm going to turn this on. Thank you for coming today, and thank you, Howard, for inviting me back. I'm Cheryl McCauley, and I'm honored to share my thoughts with you about Thaddeus Lowe and his accidental balloon landing. This briefing is slightly updated and abbreviated from last April. We'll have time for more questions. Hi, Dr. Allen. Thanks for coming. In the interest of time, here's a great website that I recommend to you, and it's maintained by none other than Lowe's great-great-grandson, Lance Firm. You'll find portions of his memoirs, family photos, newspaper accounts, and lots of primary sources. When I was first putting together my first presentation in 2023, I wrote to the address at the end of this website and asked a question. And Lance, the great-great-grandson, wrote back and answered my question. And he came to Huntsville in June of 2024 to hear the first time I gave this briefing to our roundtable in Huntsville. He's very generous about sharing his collection, and you can get a lot more information than I have time to give you today. And again, that's the www.thaddeuslowe.name is that great website. As you may know, this unique American had an interesting life before and after the Civil War, but did he make an impact during the American Civil War? It all depends on your perspective. Let's examine his exploits the next few minutes. He was born in New Hampshire in 1832. At 17, he attended a lecture on chemistry by a Professor Dinkerhoff, who invited Lowe to travel as an assistant to help him with his demonstrations. After a couple of years, Lowe bought the professor's equipment when he retired. Lowe also purchased a small laboratory that he bought with the wages he'd earned. He gave rides in his tethered balloon Pioneer. The nickname Professor stuck with Lowe. He never earned a degree, but he took advanced courses in chemistry in New York. Typically, 19th century aeronauts were given the title professor. Here's a photo of Lowe's barometer from the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in Dulles Airport. It's a mercury barometer with a sliding scale made of brass and glass, and it was 39 inches long. These are his field glasses, also part of the Smithsonian. I've tried to see them a couple of times when we've been in DC, and they're always either on loan or just not out for exhibit. And so one day I will see those with my own eyes. Lowe intended to prove, and these binoculars were donated in 1930 by Lance's great uncle, Leon Lowe. And he used these until May of 1863. Lowe intended to prove the theory that upper air currents flowed to the east and lower currents went west. Professor Joseph Henry, the first secretary of the Smithsonian, challenged Lowe to make a cross-country flight west to east, before trying to fly over the Atlantic. Henry agreed to help Lowe accomplish that if he had a successful overland flight to the east. You might like to know the size of the balloon. The Enterprise was 50 feet high with a diameter of 30 feet. Lowe built it with his father Clovis in 1858. It was the second balloon they built at his Hoboken, New Jersey facility. It was duly named Enterprise with the express approval of his wife Leontine due to the amount of money and time put into creating it. The Enterprise was built of India silk, lightweight cording, and Lowe's patented varnish. The recipe was kept secret, which would keep the balloon envelope inflated for up to 2 weeks. He planned to launch April 19th, 1861. Remember what happened the week before? The first shot was fired at Fort Sumter, South Carolina. Lowe launched his balloon, the Enterprise, from Cincinnati after a formal dinner. In fact, he didn't even stay until the dinner was over because the winds favored a launch. His crew sent him a message that it was time to inflate the balloon and begin his journey. He was so excited he forgot to change his clothes, and the flight process began. It took 3 hours to inflate the balloon, which is 20,000 cubic feet. The local newspaper editor, Murat Halstead, gave Lowe 200 copies of that day's newspaper to carry with him. He also had 2 large containers of hot coffee wrapped in blankets, several rubber bottles filled with water, a hamper of food, and Lowe was ready for his journey. Lowe's intended flight path was to New Jersey, approximately 624 miles. Once inflated, the newspapers printed at about 3 in the morning, the Enterprise began sailing, but not as eastward as Lowe had hoped. She flew southeast, reaching an altitude of 16,000 feet over the Allegheny Mountains. He also reached about 20,000 feet. 800 miles and 9 hours later, he traveled an average of 89 miles an hour. And you can see he got a little off course. His route took him where he did not intend to go. The distance between Cincinnati and Columbia near here is roughly 512 miles. He was blown off his original course. Enterprise drifted over the border between North and South Carolina and eventually landed near Pea Ridge. And you all know where that is, in the area known as Kelton in Unionville, South Carolina. This is what the area of Pea Ridge, South Carolina looked like in 2014. You can see the shadow of a balloon being flown by retired Army Major Kevin Knapp, who's, by the way, retired. He's in California now and he's not flying anymore. It was named Pea Ridge because it was said that only peas would grow there. When Lowe tried to land at another spot before he arrived here, people tried to shoot him thinking he was a northerner. Remember, and he probably landed in this field, but he was unable to persuade the farmers, that he was not a spy. Remember how he was dressed. This marker shows the approximate spot where he probably landed. My friend, Dr. Steve Lemons of Union, first sent me this photo after he cleaned up the marker 2 years ago. He got us access to visit this area last April 2025. We got permission to walk on the private property. It's a pretty special day. Here I'm doing my Julie Andrews impression. Are there any descendants of the Fowler family here today? They came in April, but I was hoping they might be back today. The website maintained by them suggests that this property was once owned by the Fowlers. You likely know the story of the woman who helped Lowe steady the basket. She told him not to pay attention to the men hiding out in the outbuildings. She said they were cowards. Otherwise, they'd be fighting in the war. According to the Fowler website, there were also 2 teenage girls who helped him, although Lowe didn't mention those 2 ladies in his memoirs. He was treated well and fed corn dodgers, and he shared the food and desserts he had in his hamper with the locals. They visited until a wagon was brought to take him with his balloon into town, where he would be kept under guard. Many of you have seen the market in front of the lodge. This is the spot where Dr. Lemons cleaned that up. And many of you have seen this marker in front of the Mount Joy Masonic Lodge in Kelton. When we first visited here the first time on our own in November of 2023, my husband called the Union Historical Society to see if they were going to be open on Veterans Day. Mr. Robert Grady answered the phone and they had a nice conversation. Afterwards, Mr. Grady mailed us these 2 newspaper articles which provided new details I hadn't found yet in my research. The one on the right mentions some of Lowe's memoirs, and the one on the left mentions Dr. Alan Charles' work, the narrative history of the Union County of South Carolina. This cartoon shows the event, Gesundheit. The blacks and whites came with pitchforks, clubs, and guns. Did you know that Jenny Lemon's great-great-great-grandfather was Charles Bully Gardner? He was one of the farmers who wanted Lowe to be hanged as a spy. You can remember how he was dressed. We believe this is the image of Bully. He was a farmer born 1805, so he was too old to be a soldier. Another descendant, let's see. There is another descendant, I'm going to go backwards one more time. There's another descendant of Frederick Tucker. He gave me permission to show photos of both Charles and his great-great-grandfather, William George Washington Going, who was also present at the landing site that day. And I thank him for permission to use these photos. The McKissick family cemetery is just a few miles from the landing site. John and Hezekiah McKissick were the first cousins to Mr. Tucker's great-great-grandfather. Here's one account according to a link provided by the Union County Historical Society. This was an account I did not find elsewhere. His death was only prevented when brothers John and Hezekiah McKissick, who were late arriving at the scene, recognized Lowe's Masonic sign of distress, verified the stranger's identity, and whisked him to safety in Union. Here he was received by local Masons and others. He spent the next day, Union, it was Sunday, before boarding a train for Cincinnati. Trains didn't run on Sundays. It was later calculated that Brother Lowe traveled over 800 miles in under 9 hours, which was a world record for long distance and speed in air flight at the time. And I believe it was the McKissick wagon that took Lowe and his balloon to Union. First, he was taken to the jail in Union, but was turned away because it was full. He was taken to the Goss Hotel, where the Arthur State Bank now stands. The hotel owner, Mr. Goss, or Mr. Black, according to one reference, had seen Lowe do a demonstration sometime prior to this and remembered him. He may have gone for a tethered balloon ride during one of Lowe's shows. Lowe was released after people in the local government and the university defended him, having heard of Professor Henry at the Smithsonian and Lowe's experiments. The mayor of Columbia wrote a letter that Lowe carried with him back through the Confederate lines, and it read, Professor T.S.C. Lowe, now accidentally in our midst, is a gentleman of integrity and high scientific attainments, and I bespeak for him the courtesies of all with whom he may come in contact, and trust that this letter, to which I have affixed a seal of the city of Columbia, South Carolina, will answer as a passport for him through the Confederate States of North America. Signed, W.H. Boatwright, Mayor. We were fortunate to meet with the Union Historical Society Board of Directors last April. I proposed that there be an exhibit in Union, South Carolina, to honor Lowe next April 2026 for the 165th anniversary of the landing at Pea Ridge. We hope to make that happen. Lowe, 29 years old, was determined to use his service for his country and help preserve the Union. Here's what happened next. Professor Henry of the Smithsonian asked Lowe to bring his balloon to Washington and demonstrate its capabilities to President Lincoln. Henry told him where to place it, and Lowe did just that. This slide shows the Capitol Dome under construction. These two portable generators were Lowe's invention. He created hydrogen gas for the balloon inflation. Altogether, he built 12 generators. This was done by using iron filings, water, and sulfuric acid. They were also painted light blue and it had Lowe printed on them. There's no mistaking it for an army wagon. Lowe's team inflated the Enterprise on what is now the grounds of the Air and Space Museum. Prior to that, it was the site of the Columbia Armory in Washington, D.C., and that's where the balloon repairs were made. Lowe's telegraph operator sent President Lincoln a brief account of what Lowe could see from the air, although a bit exaggerated. He offered his services to the country. Lowe said he could see 50 miles. Well, Manassas is only 32 miles away. Fairfax is 20 miles. So it wasn't quite 50 miles. But incidentally, other sources mentioned tents could be spotted from 6 miles away and smoke could be observed by 25 miles away. Once he read Lowe's famous telegraph from the balloon Enterprise, President Lincoln sent a message through to Samuel Chase, Secretary of the Treasury, to invite Lowe to come to the White House this evening as early as you can get after you get this note. Lowe was staying at the famous National Hotel on 6th and Pennsylvania Avenue. That's also where John Wilkes Booth stayed the night before he assassinated President Lincoln. The hotel manager delivered Chase's note to Lowe. The president invited Lowe to spend the night at the White House and discuss his field of expertise. They spoke for hours about the military application of balloons. Lowe proposed the idea of an aeronautic corps to Lincoln. Lincoln was captivated by the idea. The next morning, they spoke again over breakfast. President Lincoln sent Lowe to meet with Lieutenant General Winfield Scott and deliver a note that he, the president, was authorizing Lowe to head up a new branch of the military. How do you think that visit went? General Scott wasn't the least bit impressed with Lowe or his new balloon corps. In his autobiography, Lowe wrote about this encounter. It's almost impossible to realize to what extent ignorance sometimes finds lodgment in high places, and doubtless every inventor, every man who has a new idea, is destined to make a desperate fight for the life of his special ambition. It's interesting to note that Lowe funded all these operations himself, June through July. However, as we learned during some of my other findings, he may have had some benefactors who were Freemasons. The Bureau of Topographic Engineers finally approved the use of balloons. Lowe was technically a contractor. He wasn't a member of the military. 3 days later, June 21st, 1861, the Enterprise was moored at Falls Church, Virginia. When Confederates were conducting reconnaissance, they saw a balloon and assumed there was a large force with it. So this proved to be an unintended use of early deception. The gas generators are at work. Let's see, that's the contractor slide. And here are the generators. Lowe invented a portable hydrogen generator before they had been using coal gas from city pipes. He started using 2 generators for inflation. One wagon required 4 horses, and a fully inflated balloon could last about 2 weeks. This is a sketch of that was made in Charles County, Maryland. I'm sorry, the deployment was in Virginia by a gentleman in Maryland who did the sketch. This is a period photo showing Lowe's balloon Intrepid, the sister balloon to the Union, and conducting reconnaissance of the enemy position in Fairfax, Virginia. This is from the New York Illustrated News, July 12, 1861. Note the 4 teams, each one on different tethered rope, and they're not posing for the camera, they're hard at work. Then there's another sketch from the same day. To give you an idea, there were several balloons manned by 1 to 5 people. You can see the different sizes and capabilities. The Union, the largest size, took 1,200 yards of silk, reinforced seams, and a heavy linen cord. Ropes were used for marches and ascensions. It took 3 hours and 15 minutes to inflate this balloon. When they were inflated, they say that the balloons looked like a large orange harvest moon. The color was an orange kind of color. It was flown at Falls Church for 2 days to draw the enemy to its position on a map. By the way, she probably had this balloon, the Enterprise, had the most wartime ascensions. She was the only balloon used until the Union fleet was built. This is an example of a map drawn from the balloon, but I'm not exactly sure where that real estate is. You can see the words tents, open field, and farmhouse written on the map. Confederate General P.G.T. Beauregard ordered extra campfires be lit and dummy gun emplacements constructed to deceive the balloonists. They used stovepipes and logs painted black. Lowe noticed there seemed to be more fires lit in the afternoon after he ascended. On June 23rd and 4th, Lowe moved 2 miles from Falls Church, Virginia. It was here that Lowe performed the first occurrence of aerial military reconnaissance in American history. He also devised a system of signaling flags. If he waved a flag in one direction, the cannons needed to shoot further. And if he waved the white flag in another direction, it meant the cannons were firing too far. The topographic engineer captain ordered Lowe to inflate his balloon Enterprise and move it with the Army to Manassas. Lowe and others were not able to get their balloons in place without damaging them. 3 different aeronauts failed to do this in time because the balloons were caught in trees and telegraph wires when they were trying to move to Manassas. And by the way, there were no uniforms for these guys. They just had an insignia on their cap in the shape of a balloon with BC on it. Just after the Union defeated the Battle of Bull Run, President Lincoln had decided that had there been more information about Confederate forces, the Union wouldn't have lost. About a month later, President Lincoln asked Lowe to return to the White House. The president had heard from Professor Henry that there had been logistical challenges getting equipment and new balloons. He asked Lowe to revisit General Scott, July 25th, 1861. He penned the following on a card. Will Lieutenant General please see Professor Lowe once more about his balloon? Lance told me that his great-great-grandfather had 10 duplicates of this made for each of his children. And he had 2 of these in his possession until he gifted me with one of them. So I'll be donating this to the museum. And it was fun because that was also right after my 70th birthday, so it was a fun gift. June 2023, we drove to Dayton, Ohio to visit the National Museum of the Air Force. If you haven't been there, it's a great place to go. To my delight, there was a very nice exhibit featuring the early balloon corps. I took photos to include in this briefing. Here's how that note down in the bottom, it was displayed in that presentation. The president's note is in the middle. As you might imagine, old Winfield ignored Lowe's attempts to present the card. The general's aide kept telling Lowe the general was engaged, and then he was having lunch, and then he was having a nap. President Lincoln was awaiting a response. Here's how he handled it, according to Lowe's autobiography. All the time the president was awaiting the result of my conference with General Scott, and when with some heat possibly, I reported that General Scott could not be seen on official business, even at the president's suggestion. He looked at me a moment, laughed, arose, and seizing his tall silk hat, bade me come on. He proposed to find out what was the matter with Scott. We soon reached the general's headquarters. This time, the general's guard turned out as a sentry called the President of the United States. The orderly saluted, and presto, we stalked into the presence of the old general, who certainly looked startled. General, the president said, this is my friend, Professor Lowe, who is organizing an aeronautic corps for the Army and is to be its chief. I wish you would facilitate his work in every way and give him a letter to Captain John Dahlgren, Commandant of the Navy Yard, and one to Army Quartermaster Captain Montgomery Meigs, with instructions for them to give him all the necessary things to equip his branch of the service with land and water. It was extraordinary how matters changed. The atmosphere cleared at once. The general gave the orders with alacrity, and when I returned with the president to the White House, I had at last letters which put me in definite motion, the wheels which made me chief of the Aeronautic Corps of the United States Army. As I mentioned earlier, during this period, Lowe received no funding from the government. Lowe paid for everything himself, perhaps with help from his benefactors, until August 1861, when the Union Army Balloon Corps was established. New balloons were authorized to be built for the Union service, and the balloons were manufactured in Philadelphia. The first one was the Eagle, a smaller balloon, only had room for one man. It was authorized on August 2nd, 1861, and completed August 28th. So it took about a month to build the smallest balloon. Ground photos we have from photographers Andrew Gardner and Matthew Brady are helpful, but they never made a photo from a balloon in the air. Gardner was assigned to the peninsula area. Some of the general officers who went up favored using the balloons were McClellan, Hooker, McDowell, Fitzjohn Porter, Meade, Sickles, and Buford. That is, until General Porter was anxious to go up and Lowe was not available because he was trying to get better rations for his crew. General Porter insisted on going up at 5:30 a.m. without Lowe, thinking he could manage it alone, since it was just a tethered flight and he'd gone up with Lowe over 100 times. However, the wind kicked in and the crew lost hold of the rope. Only one tether line had been used instead of the normal 3, and that one had been compromised by acid and broke free, while the General Porter was 50 feet in the air. Porter went sailing over enemy lines. One reference said he opened a valve and allowed the hydrogen to escape, and only the silk acting as a parachute saved his life. Another reference said, fortunately, the wind blew him back. Either way, he happened to land about 6:30 in the morning near a road to Yorktown, where Lowe happened to be. Lowe saw the general climb out of the basket. Porter had observed the enemy positions and had excellent recall of what he saw, and created a sketch of a sketch of the enemy disposition. Lowe said, "I found it difficult for a time to restore confidence among the officers as to the safety of this means of observation. We'll be in Yorktown next month, and we hope to see the area where Lowe's balloon camp was located, and it's on the edge of the Yorktown National Park." Do you know which of the brave cavalry officers did not like the idea of being in a balloon? It was Lieutenant George Custer. He did not like to go up, and he said he described the wicker basket as being 2 feet high and 4 feet long, and it didn't feel safe. He just wanted to sit on the floor when it went up. Here's a photo showing the Intrepid being replenished by the smaller balloon Constitution in May 1862. There's a picture on the display table that's in a frame standing up, and it shows the connectivity between the two balloons. It shows how the air was passed between one to the other. This map shows 2 Union balloons and a single Confederate balloon that we'll address a bit later. I only saw this map on Lance's website, and I'm really glad I found it. This sketch shows Lowe's balloon observing the battle, and that's in Fair Oaks. And this photo was taken just prior to the Battle of Gaines Mill on the edge of the property now preserved by the American Battlefield Trust. Here's a really good look at Lowe's generators and preparations by Union soldiers for an ascent. What I like about this particular picture, and let's see if we can get the, maybe, no. He's here. There's Lowe. And he's feeling the balloon. He's feeling to see if it's got enough air in it yet, enough gas in it yet. I really like that photo. And that's a Matthew Brady photo in the National Archives. While operating from Dr. Gaines' farm on the future Gaines Mill battlefield, Lowe positioned close enough to Richmond that he could clearly see the movement of soldiers and individuals within the city. In preparation for General McClellan's assault on the Confederate forces in the peninsula, Lowe was able to observe 8 miles of enemy defenses near Yorktown. Lowe ascended at midnight with Brigadier General Heintzelman, a corps commander of McClellan. Lowe wrote about what he saw. There were bonfires that could only be seen from the balloon, and the general wondered why there were more wagons going into the area than were going out. Lowe explained that the ingoing wagons were light and moved rapidly, while the wheels being visible as they passed each campfire, while the outgoing wagons were heavily loaded and moved slowly. General Joe Johnston has moved thousands of reinforcements to the peninsula, but was now retreating to Richmond. Because Lowe reported on this, McClellan was able to conduct a surprise attack the next morning to occupy Williamsburg. And this is a sketch showing the Eagle, the balloon Eagle, in a bad way during a storm during the Peninsula Campaign. The command and control of the 7 balloons that were built went from engineer to quartermaster, back to engineer, and ended with the Signal Corps. It must have been a logistical nightmare, no matter who was in control of them. The Union Army built 2 larger balloons, the Intrepid and the Union, which were 65 feet high with a diameter of 38 feet. Those were made with double thick fine silk. The fabric cost about $500 and the netting $200, and the wicker basket was about $12. Each balloon also had ropes, ballast, and cables for ascending and landing. None of them were shot down, although some were fired upon by both Confederate and Union troops. Lowe's basket was hit, but not the balloon occupant, not the balloon envelope or the occupant of the basket. You can see just how small the basket was, and Lowe is standing there. I think this looks a little posed. Everyone's looking at the camera except for Lowe. He's writing a message. Then we have the idea of the balloon boat, and this is the Washington, and the balloon is named the Washington on a Union gunboat. It's on the Potomac River near Mount Vernon, November 1861. This is not the first use of an aircraft carrier, however. That distinction goes to the steamship Fanny, whose balloonist Arrival of Lowe's, John LaMountain, spotted Confederate troops in the Hampton Roads area of Virginia and reported to Major General Butler. She was later captured and became part of the Confederate Navy. Did the Confederate Army also have a balloon corps? About a year later, the Confederates had one balloon for a couple of months as a sole competitor from May to July 1862. It flew over Richmond while General Lee put up a defense there, nicknamed the silk dress balloon. It was reportedly made from ladies' petticoats of all demographics, rich and poor alike. However, petticoats were white and cotton undergarments. The balloon envelope was made of silk. A merchant named Langdon Cheeves paid $514 in Savannah and Charleston for 20 mixed bolts of unwrapped silk, dress silk, lying in the warehouses of Kerrison and Lighting, wholesale fabric merchants. The colors were yellow, green, white, and dark red, some plain and some carrying decorative patterns. It was sealed with a clear vulcanized rubber coating removed from old wagon springs, which gave the silk an unusual glisten in full sunlight. It also leaked. It was on a tethered railroad boxcar on the York River Railroad. The appearance of this balloon reinforced McClellan's fear that the Confederates were planning for an offensive against his left flank. For the second day, the Confederates were able to continue fooling McClellan south of the river by employing minor diversionary attacks to command the attention of 60,000 Federal troops, while the heavier action occurred north of the river. Here's the map I showed you earlier, and I circled the Gazelle in red. She's near Richmond, positioned near the railroad, and that's one of the ways they transported her, and that's the Confederate balloon. According to historian and balloonist Kevin Knapp, between 1861 and 1863, the North made more than 3,000 such ascensions using 7 balloons. The South only had 2 balloons and made fewer than 10 flights. We were really lucky to see this balloon remnant in Ohio at the Museum of the Air Force. There was no further information about it. Many years ago, I thought if John and I had $1 zillion, we could recreate a silk balloon to take to battlefield reenactments. This is a photo of a remnant that Lance Firm sent me from a collection of documents that he owns. This is a photo of another remnant, and it's backlit from the archives in Richmond. The result is terrific. You can really see the colors and the patterns. What was the Museum of the Confederacy is now the American Civil War Museum. This piece was presented by L.P. Lowe in Los Angeles, California, whose father was the late Professor T.S.C. Lowe and Chief Aeronaut of the USA, of the U.S. Army. The balloon was turned over to his command. I'd like to quote from an unpublished manuscript about the dresses that were donated. Every old woman who had saved her wedding dress rose to the occasion. Women of all grades and conditions, children, young ladies, poor women who had but a single dress, who had saved it for years, widows who had packed their bridal dresses away in old cedar chests, took them out, wept over them, doubtless, and marched to the nearest official, and with eyes glistening with patriotism for the cause their husbands and brothers were fighting for, handed in the dress. Some of those dresses had been seen by General Washington, King George, Napoleon, and Frederick the Great. One woman described the significance of her dress when she handed it to one of General Lee's second lieutenants, with a tear running down her cheek. Yes, it is a sacred relic. It is a dress worn by my grandmother at her wedding. General Washington's arm had pressed that sleeve many a time, and the rustle of the old silk has been heard at Arlington and at his headquarters and in New York and in Philadelphia. And that, sir, continued the venerable old lady, is why I give it without a pang. I give it to my country. There were many dresses collected in Richmond, so many the headquarters didn't know what to do with them all. Women and tailors laid them out and began to sew them together. The Confederate balloon named Gazelle measured about 30 feet high, much smaller than Lowe's 60-foot Intrepid. The Gazelle had a 7,500 cubic foot capacity and was assigned to Engineer Captain E.P. Alexander, the same officer who would serve as Lee's artillery officer at Gettysburg the next summer. Alexander was a frequent observer from the Gazelle. She was a patriotic symbol, and Alexander used her to raise morale in Richmond. In a letter written in September 1861 to his father, Alexander wrote, we sent a rifle shell so near old Lowe and his balloon that it came down as fast as gravity could bring him. Once, while Alexander was in the Gazelle, Lowe was intrepid on the opposite side of the Chickahominy River. They were less than 5 miles apart and out of rifle range. They could see each other through telescopes. Both did their best to keep their commanders, Lee and McClellan, informed of the activities on the ground. Lee's troops overcame the Union Army in the 7 days battle. With the end of McClellan's command, though, came the beginning of the end of Lowe's Balloon Corps. In July 1862, the Gazelle was being transported down the James River on a tug ship, the Teaser. They were following the activities of the Union retreat. Alexander ascended on the tethered balloon at sunrise in full view of the defeated Union soldiers. Unfortunately, the tug ran aground near Union lines. As they were waiting for the tide to come in, the Maritanza, a Union gunboat, fired some shots. Alexander jumped into the water and made it to shore. The tug and the balloon and everything the Confederates left on board, including uniforms, belts, pistols, muskets, silver chains, bedding, clothes, and letters, were confiscated. Lowe reported that the balloon Gazelle was taken to Washington and cut up and many pieces given to congressmen and others as souvenirs. In his retirement in California, Lowe still had a piece of this faded, fragile fabric in his office. This dark red material about the size of a playing card was found folded in one of his letters. It's in the Library of Congress today. Alexander wrote as Confederate General, E.P. Alexander, "I have never understood why the enemy abandoned the use of military balloons. Even if the observers never saw anything, they would have been worth all they cost for the annoyance and delay they caused us in trying to keep our movements out of their sight." The romanticized stories of the balloon were told even by General Longstreet. Here's his full quote. "The Federals had been using balloons in examining our positions, and we watched with envious eyes their beautiful observations as they floated high up in the air and well out of the range of our guns. We longed for the balloons that poverty denied us. A genius rose for the occasion and suggested we send out and gather together all the silk dresses in the Confederacy and make a balloon. Soon we had a great patchwork ship of many and varied hues. The balloon was ready for the 7 days campaign. We had no gas, save for Richmond, and except what was in Richmond, and the custom was to inflate it there, tie it securely to an engine, and run it on the York River Railroad to any point where we desired to send it up. One day it was on a steamer going down the James when the tide went out and left the vessel and the balloon high and dry on a bar. The Federals gathered it in, the last silk dress in the Confederacy. The capture was the meanest trick of the war, one I have never yet forgiven." According to the Dayton Museum, actually the South had at least 3 balloons in service, one of cotton and 2 made from new bolts of silk of various colors. The South's inability to produce hydrogen in the field, along with material shortages, forced the Confederates to abandon balloon operations in 1863. Lowe missed the Second Battle of Bull Run in the summer of 1862 when he contracted malaria from the mosquito-infested Chickahominy River during the Peninsula Campaign. While he was recovering in D.C., he received orders on September 18th to move his balloons to Sharpsburg, which was a day after the Battle of Antietam. McClellan expressed regret that Lowe had not been present at the battle, as the balloon would have been invaluable to him during the engagement. Lowe told McClellan he was clearly frustrated at the delays in communications and his operations and felt it had to do with his being a civilian. McClellan told him he would recommend that the balloons be made a distinct branch of the Army and that Lowe would be given a commission, which was Lowe's dream from the beginning. However, by November, McClellan was replaced by Burnside and the balloons were not being used. At Fredericksburg, December 1862, Lowe was not given permission to fly until the day of the battle on December 13th, but the fog that morning didn't dissipate until 10 a.m. There was not enough time to evaluate the enemy disposition at the wall. Lowe was observing from Stafford Heights across the Rappahannock River, which was a considerable distance to the rear. He didn't need the telegraph or signal flags because he could simply shout down his observations to Burnside's staff at the headquarters. General Burnside was also relieved in January 1863 after the massive defeat in Fredericksburg, December 1862. After building an aerial reconnaissance force of 7 balloons, 12 generators, and 9 aeronauts, Lowe's career with the Union Army ended badly. in April 1863, when Captain Comstock was given authority over the Air Balloon Corps under the command of General Hooker. Lowe's salary was reduced from $10 a day in gold, which was a colonel's salary, to $6 a day. The other crew salaries were also reduced, and eventually Clovis, his father, who was trained in all aspects of balloon operations, was fired. Lowe wrote to General Butterfield, who was General Hooker's chief of staff, to tender his resignation. He focused on the financial sacrifices he'd made to keep the balloons operating. He requested reimbursement for expenses on materials and equipment he purchased. General Butterfield sent the letter back, noting it should have gone through Captain Comstock first for approval. Lowe continued to serve for no pay through the Battle of Chancellorsville in 1863, where he reported heavy columns of the enemy's infantry and artillery moving up the river, accompanied by many army wagons in early May. Not only were the balloons absent from Antietam, they were not in Gettysburg either. After Lowe left, there were a couple of remaining civilian aeronauts supporting the Army of the Potomac, but none were deployed to Pennsylvania in time for the battle. Lowe resigned May 8, 1863. Eventually, all but 2 balloonists left. The last observation of Confederate troops was done while Confederate troops were moving through the Blue Ridge Mountains in June of 1863, just before Gettysburg. There are 3 points I'd like to make about the effectiveness of the balloon operations and whether or not Lowe made a difference. The first is that, by no surprise, balloon operations are dependent on the weather. Thunderstorms, snow, fog, rain, and ice and wind made a huge impact on how the balloons were handled, if they were even able to ascend. Second, Lowe never discussed the death and destruction he observed when directing artillery fire and observing the enemy. He witnessed horrible sights from the air. It had to have taken a toll on him. Lastly, Lowe had difficulties with the other balloonists who shared his passion. They may have accomplished a lot more than they did had they gotten along. Lack of trust and little collaboration between John Wise, John LaMountain, and the Allen brothers was evident while trying to accomplish the same goals. Finally, I believe his most successful endeavors were in support of the Army of the Potomac, where he did have the ear of the commanders. Lowe's last balloon flight after the war was in November 1865, when a couple wanted to be married in the air, but the preacher wouldn't participate in an aerial wedding. So the couple was actually married the day before the balloon ride. Would you do a wedding in a balloon?
Sure.
That doesn't surprise me. This is a monument in Richmond, Virginia, that lists officers, both Union and Confederate, who either made ascensions or encouraged the use of balloons during the war. I haven't gotten to see this yet, but I will. There used to be a little airport there and a little museum. They're both gone, and now behind this monument is a concrete factory. But there's talk about trying to move this to a better place in Virginia where people will actually get to see it. Other tidbits. TSC stood for Thaddeus Sobienski Constantine. He's a member of the U.S. Army Military Intelligence Hall of Fame. The Lowe Army heliport at Fort Rucker, now Fort Novasol, near Enterprise, Alabama, is named for him. And he was inducted into the National Balloon Museum in Iowa in 2017. He was nicknamed the grandfather of the United States Air Force. And he continued inventions after the war. Here's a photo of his first ice machine, which was used for refrigeration and shipping. Lowe built the first shipboard ice machine and shipped fresh beef on a steamer from Texas to New Orleans. The beef was in good condition when it arrived, which is a remarkable achievement in 1866. Lowe built a resort in California on Mount Lowe, of course that's the name of the mountain, and designed a railway and funicular to transport guests to the top. Over time, it had been destroyed by fire and earthquake, and nothing remains there. Can you imagine? He also had an aviator granddaughter. In 1910, Lowe took his 9-year-old granddaughter to an air show. 20 years later, Frances Pancho Barnes, 1901 to 1975, beat Amelia Earhart's speed record of 181 miles per hour in 1930. Pancho's record was 196 miles per hour Later, she broke her own record at 245 miles an hour.
And that is the meat heart of the picture there too.
Yeah.
On the right. And there she is.
It is. They're both there together. Correct. So he's buried outside of Los Angeles, California. He died in 1913. And finally, in 1987, at the age of 36, Richard Branson of the UK crossed the Atlantic in a hot air balloon, which was Lowe's dream 126 years prior. I like to call Thaddeus Lowe the Richard Branson of the Civil War. And I listed some of the references, and a lot of those books are there, and those are all being donated to the museum for anybody who wants to continue researching. And there are tons of websites. Thank you. And what are your questions?
Oh, Sharon.
Sir.
Let me make up my, we got a view where I can talk to people a little bit. You mentioned the Army colonel who had his own balloon and that you knew.
Major Knapp.
Major
Kevin Knapp.
Kevin Knapp. Yeah, and I got to know him, and he invited my wife and me to accompany him. And we went up in a reenactment of the balloon. Well, it wasn't a landing, it was an ascension from behind Mount Joy Church in 2004. And so this is the only time my wife and I had ever been up in a balloon. We never had been up in any since then. There's a hot air balloon. It was not the cold gas balloon and all that. But we flew from Mount Joy Church about 10 or 12 miles northwest, and it came down very close to the highway from Jonesville that runs up to Gaffney. And it was a very interesting flight, and it was getting dark, and we were getting out over wooded country, and balloons seemed to be attracted to the high power line, to the radiation from the high power line. So we were going along just about 100 feet or so above this gigantic high power line thing. We went across there, and it's getting dark, and there were woods on either side of the power line. And I was saying, well, we're going to have to put it down sometime or other, because it's getting dark. And my wife said, well, there's no problem, no problem. I was thinking there's a problem. But anyway, we finally, we had a car, like a follow, we were in phone communication with the car, and we told them where we were and all that. And we finally came down, lowered it a little bit, and then we blew over to the side of the power line and landed on the field, in the field. It's maybe we were 100 yards from the power line when we actually came to a landing. A little bit. It's a little different sort of an adventure, but it was very good to go up with the. He stayed around town and went and made some other ascents around town, but I wasn't with him on any of the others. I just thought I'd throw that in for what it was worth.
It's exciting. It's an exciting experience. Has anybody else been up in an air balloon, hot air balloon?
Dr. McCauley, he found it ironic that legend has it that Thaddeus Lowe was slayed by a Masonic symbol, Masonic sign. You find it ironic that where he landed, where he supposedly landed, is within 100 yards of the Masonic Lodge.
Thank goodness that's where he landed. Thank goodness.
Of course, the lodge came along by
Well, yeah, the lodge was there at that time.
1879.
There's no Masonic Lodge around here.
Most of it is where they.
There was a mason in the group.
Oh, yeah, they were members from the records that we have. The McKissick brothers were members at Skull Shows, Masonic Lodge at that time, because it was the closest one to them. Then, you know where Skull Shows is, Cherokee County. But as soon as the lodge was, came into being in 1879, about 20 of those folks, including Dr. Lowe, who was the physician out in that area at the time, he and the McKissick brothers and all those, they became members that the new lodge, charter members of Mount Joy. And Cheryl, there's one piece of information I just wanted to share with you, and I can't remember if we talked about this or not, but since your presentation, I got into a conversation with some people in Columbia who belonged to a Masonic lodge, and they'd heard about the Professor Lowe research. They knew that one of their past masters had gone to the jail and visited Professor Lowe in Columbia when he was locked up there. It was Boatwright, who was the mayor of Columbia, but he was an active Freemason who became the Grand Master of the state Mason of South Carolina the next year. But they met, and I can't help but believe that some of that is helped produce that letter
Absolutely.
that he wrote to help the passport to get him through to Cincinnati.
Absolutely. I believe it too. I think that's a great observation. Thank you. Fantastic. Any other questions or comments or experiences?
You think that the initial campaign was the most effective use?
Yes, without a doubt. I wish he had hung in there until Gettysburg, though. To think of the lives that could have been saved had they had that intelligence. I wish he could have hung on a little longer, but he had a temper. That's my uninformed opinion. It seems he was frustrated, and he finally had enough when he felt that he hadn't been treated well, but I just wish he could have stayed a little.
He was such a brilliant man.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. He had a lot of ideas. And a friend just loaned us a book about his brother, Percival.
Then what about the Dragoons? I have an electronic copy of that.
Yes, and I was looking through that. There are no references to Thaddeus, though, in that book. But his brother was also very brilliant and an excellent writer and entrepreneur, and documented lots of things. And so his descriptions of the military were so detailed, and he has a lot of really good information in that resource. If there are no other questions, we'll call it a day, but I sure appreciate that you were here today. Thank you.
I don't know if y'all caught that or not, but during the presentation, Dr. McCauley said that a lot of these artifacts are being donated to the Union County Museum, and we're going to put a special display up there. As soon as we get our Christmas decorations down, we're going to have our Revolutionary War artifacts in front of the museum in anticipation of our 250th celebration for the Revolutionary War starting. But and these artifacts are going to occupy a special place back there in the museum. And so we thank you so much for donating those to us.
You're so welcome. And it helps to have, you'll have something special for the April 18th,
Yes.
165th anniversary of the landing. So I'm really thrilled. Thank you for making that happen, Howard. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you
Thank
so
you all for
much.
coming. It's been a pleasure. Please, if you haven't signed the sheet, do so on your way out.